Hi there, welcome to Dreamy Histories channel. Tonight, we're taking a rather unusual journey through time, one that might make you grateful for your modern job, no matter how much you hate Monday mornings. Picture yourself standing in a medieval city street at midnight, the moon barely visible through the smoke of 1,000 chimneys, and suddenly you hear splashing sounds from above. You look up just in time to see a cascade of human waste pouring from a window, and there, knee-deep in the accumulating filth, stands a figure with a shovel and cart. That's a gong farmer, and frankly, you probably won't survive a single shift doing what they did every night. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Alright, let's begin the story. You're standing in the narrow alleyways of medieval London, and the stench hits you like a physical wall. This isn't just any bad smell. It's the accumulated waste of thousands of people who've been using public cesspits and private guardrobes for weeks. As a gong farmer, you've got the most literal crap job in history, and you're only allowed to work between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. because the authorities decided your work was too offensive for daylight hours. Your wooden shovel feels heavy in your hands as you approach tonight's first job, a cesspit beneath a wealthy merchant's house that hasn't been emptied in 3 months. The pay is decent, about 6 pence per ton of waste removed, which sounds good until you realize a single cesspit can hold up to 16 tons of human excrement. You'll be here all night, and that's if you're lucky enough not to fall in. The wooden boards covering the pit groan under your weight as you remove them, releasing a wave of methane so powerful it makes your eyes water. You tie a rope around your waist, your only safety measure, and lower yourself into the darkness. The semi-liquid waste reaches your thighs immediately, and you can feel it seeping through your leather boots. Historians still argue whether gong farmers wore any protective clothing at all, but most evidence suggests they worked in little more than their regular clothes, which would never truly be clean again. You begin shoveling, each scoop making a grotesque sucking sound as you lift it to your partner above. He's supposed to be loading the waste into barrels on your cart, but you can hear him retching between loads. New guys never last long in this business. The waste isn't just feces and urine, it's also rotting food, dead rats, and occasionally something much worse. Last month, your crew found a dead infant in a cesspit near Cheapside. The authorities barely investigated. After all, who's going to thoroughly examine a crime scene covered in excrement? The real danger isn't just the disgust factor, it's the deadly gases. Hydrogen sulfide and methane build up in these pits, creating an invisible killer that's claimed more gong farmers than anyone bothers to count. You've heard stories of entire crews found dead at the bottom of cesspits, overcome by fumes in seconds. There's a reason they call it the night soil men's curse. Though personally, you think being cursed would be redundant at this point. Your shovel hits something hard, probably another dead dog. Medieval people had a charming habit of throwing deceased pets into cesspits rather than burying them. As you work around the obstruction, you remember why you took this job in the first place. The money is surprisingly good. You can earn more in one night than a skilled craftsman makes in 3 days. Of course, there's the minor detail that no one will rent you a room, serve you in a tavern, or let you near their daughters. Gong farmers live on the outskirts of town in their own little community of the perpetually filthy. The sun rises over the fulling mills, and you're already knee-deep in a wooden vat filled with fermenting human urine that's been aging for at least 2 weeks. The ammonia burns your nostrils and makes your eyes stream tears that won't stop no matter how many times you've done this. As a fuller, you're performing one of the most essential steps in medieval cloth production. And yes, that means spending 8 to 10 hours a day trampling woolen cloth in stale piss. You lift your tunic higher as you begin the rhythmic stomping that will continue until your legs cramp and your feet go numb. The urine needs to penetrate every fiber of the wool to remove the lanolin and oils, and the only way to ensure even distribution is through the constant pressure of human feet. Some of the larger fulling operations have started using water-powered hammers, but your master insists the old ways produce better cloth. Easy for him to say. He's not the one whose skin is perpetually stained yellow and peeling from the constant exposure to ammonia. The other fullers working alongside you have developed what you call fuller's foot, a condition where the skin becomes so damaged it cracks and bleeds, never quite healing before the next day's work begins. You've tried wrapping your feet in cloth, but it just falls apart in the acidic liquid. One of the older workers claims rubbing pig fat on your soles helps, but you suspect he just enjoys watching new fullers slather themselves in lard before stepping into the piss vats. The truly sick joke is that this isn't even the worst smelling part of the process. Before the cloth reaches your vat, it's been soaked in a delightful mixture that includes fuller's earth, a type of clay, and various alkaline substances extracted from burnt seaweed, potash, and sometimes even decomposed vegetables. The combination creates a smell that makes straight urine seem almost pleasant by comparison. Medieval textile workers had strong stomachs, or they didn't last long in the trade. You pause to scratch at the persistent rash on your calves, an occupational hazard that every fuller develops within their first month. The guild physician claims it's caused by an excess of yellow bile drawn out by the vapors. But you're pretty sure it's just your skin's way of protesting the daily chemical bath. Still, the guild takes care of its own. Fullers who become too crippled to work receive a small pension, assuming they live long enough to collect it. The cloth beneath your feet is gradually transforming from a rough, greasy fabric into something that will eventually grace a merchant's shoulders. It's a 12-hour process minimum, and you'll need to change the urine bath at least twice. Fresh supplies arrive daily in large barrels collected from public urinals and private homes. There's actually a thriving trade in human urine. Collectors go door to door with buckets, paying a half-penny per gallon. You've heard that some enterprising families water down their contributions, but the mill's overseer has ways of testing the concentration. Diluted urine doesn't have enough ammonia to properly treat the cloth. Historians still argue whether fullers added anything else to their urine vats. Some records mention wash, a mysterious substance that might have been stale beer, wine dregs, or even more exotic additions. Your master swears by adding a bucket of 3-week-old ale to each vat, claiming it produces a softer finish. You've learned not to question the process in this trade. Some knowledge is better left unexamined. The social stigma of being a fuller is almost as persistent as the smell. Last week, you tried to court the baker's daughter, but her father chased you off with a rolling pin, shouting that he'd rather see her married to a leper than a piss treader. The irony is that the cloth you're producing will be worn by the same people who cross the street to avoid you. That fine wool cloak the guildmaster wears to church. You spent 14 hours trampling it in urine to achieve that perfect texture and color. By midday, your legs are screaming for relief, but you've got 6 more hours of stomping ahead. You've developed a sort of meditation to pass the time, focusing on the squelching sounds and trying not to think about the fact that you're essentially marinating in the collective waste of your entire neighborhood. At least you're not a gong farmer, you tell yourself. Though honestly, the distinction feels pretty thin when you're calf-deep in fermenting pee. The rotting deer carcass has been hanging in the beam house for 2 weeks now, and the maggots writhing through its flesh tell you it's perfectly ready for your work. As a tanner, you're about to transform this putrid hide into supple leather, and the process will assault every one of your senses in ways that would make those urine-stomping fullers from the cloth district count their blessings. You grab your fleshing knife, a curved blade that's seen more decomposing tissue than a plague doctor's scalpel, and prepare for another day in medieval Europe's most notorious trade. You drag the hide to your workbeam, a smooth log positioned at an angle, and begin scraping away the remaining flesh and fat. Each stroke of your knife releases a fresh wave of putrefaction that makes your empty stomach churn. Breakfast is a luxury you gave up years ago. There's no point eating when you'll just vomit it up an hour into your shift. The chunks of rotting meat fall into a bucket at your feet, where they'll ferment further until they're sold to farmers as fertilizer. Nothing goes to waste in the tanning yard, except perhaps your sense of smell, which died somewhere around your 3rd day on the job. The beam house where you work the initial stages sits downwind from the town, a full quarter-mile past the city walls. Even that distance isn't enough to spare citizens from the stench when the wind shifts. Last summer, the town council tried to force your guild to move another mile out, but your master successfully argued that any farther and the transport costs would make leather prohibitively expensive. The councilmen held perfume handkerchiefs to their noses throughout the entire hearing. Once you've scraped the hide clean, it's time for the lime pits. Vats filled with a caustic mixture of quicklime and water that will loosen the hair for removal. You lower the hide into the milky liquid, careful not to splash any on your arms. You learned that lesson the hard way when you started. The scars still itch when it rains. The hides will soak here for 2 weeks, during which time the lime will eat away at the hair follicles and further decompose any remaining flesh. The smell from these pits is different from the rotting meat. It's a sharp, chemical burn that seems to crawl up your nostrils and nest in your sinuses. But the lime pits are just the appetizer in this feast of foul odors. The main course awaits in the Tawayang pits, where you'll soon transfer these hides for the actual tanning process. These contain a special mixture that would make even the strongest stomach revolt. Fermented dog feces. Yes, you heard that correctly. Medieval tanners discovered that dog dung, particularly from animals fed a diet high in protein, contains enzymes perfect for softening leather. There's actually a thriving trade in dog shit. Young boys earn pennies collecting it from the streets, and your tannery goes through several cartloads per week. You wade into the Tawayang pit, the semi-liquid dog feces reaching your knees, and begin kneading the hides with your feet. The texture is indescribable, somewhere between porridge and mud, but with chunks that squish between your toes in ways that haunt your dreams. This process, charmingly called puring, must continue for several hours to ensure the enzymes penetrate every part of the hide. You've developed a technique of breathing through your mouth, though that just means you taste the fumes instead of smelling them. Historians still argue whether medieval tanners used exclusively dog dung or mixed it with pigeon droppings and human urine for variety. Your master swears by a proprietary blend that includes all three, plus some secret ingredients he'll only reveal to guild members who've survived 10 years in the trade. Given that most tanners either die or find other work within 5 years, his secret seems pretty safe. The social isolation of tanners makes fullers look like popular courtiers. You're required by law to live in the Tanners' Quarter, a small district of fellow leather workers who've grown immune to each other's stench. Marriages happen within the community because no outsider would consider joining a tanning family. Your wife comes from 3 generations of tanners, and your children will likely follow the trade, not by choice, but because no other guild will accept someone raised in the tannery district. The smell, they say, gets into your bloodline. The physical toll shows on every tanner you know. Your hands are permanently stained a mottled brown yellow from the various chemicals, and your fingernails are, well, you try not to look at them too closely. The guild physician attributes the common tanner's ailments, respiratory problems, skin diseases, and premature aging to miasmic vapors. But you suspect constantly handling rotting flesh and caustic chemicals might have something to do with it. The death cart's wheels creak through the mud as you drag it down another narrow alley, following the sweet, sickly smell that's become your compass in these plague-ravaged streets. As a plague barrier, you're one of the few people still working in London during the Black Death of 1348, and the red cross painted on the door ahead tells you there's more work waiting. You pull the cloth tighter around your nose. Not that it helps much against the miasma of death that hangs over the entire city like fog, and prepare to enter another house of horror. You push open the door to find a scene that's become numbingly familiar. An entire family dead in their beds, their bodies blackened and swollen with the characteristic buboes that give this pestilence its terrifying appearance. The youngest child can't be more than 5 years old, her small hand still clutching a wooden doll. You've learned to work quickly and without thinking too much. Dwelling on the human tragedy makes the job impossible. Your thick leather gloves provide some protection as you wrap each body in rough cloth, though you know several plague barriers who've contracted the disease despite all precautions. The pay for this work is extraordinary. You earn more in a week than you used to make in 3 months as a labourer. Of course, there's the minor detail that most plague barriers don't live long enough to spend their earnings. Your predecessor lasted exactly 11 days before the telltale swellings appeared in his groin. You found his body in the same death pit where he'd dumped hundreds of others. A bit of cosmic irony that would be funny if it weren't so terrifying. You load the bodies onto your cart, stacking them like cordwood to make room for the next house's harvest. The city authorities initially insisted on individual burials with proper Christian rites. But that fantasy ended when the death toll reached 100 souls per day. Now you're heading for the mass grave outside Aldgate, a pit so vast you can't see the other side through the lime dust that rises from its depths. The bishop blessed it last month, declaring the entire pit consecrated ground, which seems like a theological shortcut but keeps the populace from rioting. The strangest part of your job isn't the bodies, it's the living. People flee when they see you coming. Mothers grab their children and slam doors. Even the city guards give you a wide berth. You're marked by your profession as surely as if you had the plague yourself. The red hood you're required to wear serves as a warning bell, and the staff you carry to measure the regulation 6-foot distance between you and the living has become a symbol of death itself. Last week, a group of flagellants attacked you with stones, claiming you were profiting from God's punishment. Historians still argue whether plague buriers were volunteers, conscripts, or criminals forced into service. The truth, at least in your case, is simpler. You were desperate. When the plague arrived and the economy collapsed, you had a choice between starving with your family or taking the devil's wages to bury the dead. Your wife hasn't let you inside the house for 2 months now. You sleep in a shed behind the churchyard and leave your earnings in a vinegar-soaked box for her to collect. It's the only way to protect them from both the disease and the association with your cursed profession. You reach the mass grave as the sun sets, painting the sky the color of blood. fitting enough for this apocalyptic scene. Other buriers are already at work, tipping their carts into the pit, where quicklime immediately begins its work of dissolution. The bodies tumble down in a grotesque cascade, and you try not to think about how many familiar faces might be among them. The baker who used to give you day-old bread, the priest who baptized your children, the whore who worked the corner near your old lodgings, all equal now in this anonymous mass of putrefying flesh. The smell from the pit is indescribable, a combination of decomposition, lime, and something else. The distinctive sweetness of plague victims that experienced buriers can identify from 100 yards away. You've heard theories about what causes the pestilence: punishment from God, poisoned air, an unfortunate conjunction of planets. So, your fellow burier, a former scholar from Oxford, insists it's spread by tiny seeds of corruption that pass from person to person. You don't much care about the cause. You just want to survive long enough to see its end. As you prepare for the night shift, because the dying don't stop for darkness, you check yourself again for the telltale signs. No swellings in your neck, groin, or armpits. No fever. No bleeding from the nose. Another day survived in the most dangerous job in Christendom. Tomorrow you'll do it all again, if tomorrow comes. The death bell tolls in the distance, calling you to the next house, the next family, the next cartload of souls for the lime pit. The crowd parts before you like the Red Sea, but there's no miracle here, just the universal revulsion that follows you everywhere as the town executioner. You're wearing your distinctive red hood and cloak, the uniform that marks you as society's necessary monster, and carrying the massive two-handed sword that will separate another soul from its body in about 10 minutes. The condemned man, a baker who killed his wife in a drunken rage, walks ahead of you with the priest, making his final peace with God while you mentally calculate the exact angle needed for a clean cut. Your father was the executioner before you, and his father before him, in many German towns. The job is hereditary, passed down like a cursed heirloom. You never had a choice in the matter. From the age of 7, you were training with weighted practice swords, learning anatomy from executed corpses, and studying the art of death. By 12, you were assisting at executions, holding the condemned steady while your father swung the blade. The first time you acted as principal executioner, at 16. Your hands shook so badly you needed 2 strokes. The crowd threw rotten vegetables and stones. Your father beat you worse than usual that night. The isolation of your profession extends to every aspect of life. You can't enter the tavern through the front door. There's a special entrance in the back, leading to a cordoned-off section where you drink alone. The baker won't sell you bread directly. You must send your wife to buy it, and even she faces harassment. Your children attend no school because other parents threaten to withdraw their own kids rather than have them associate with the executioner's spawn. When your daughter fell ill last winter, 3 physicians refused to treat her before you found one desperate enough for coin to enter your house. You've reached the scaffold now, a permanent wooden structure in the market square that serves as your office. The crowd has gathered. Public executions are entertainment in a world with few diversions, but they maintain a careful distance from you. Even the guards who arrest criminals won't touch you directly. They communicate through intermediaries, as if your profession were contagious. The irony isn't lost on you. They despise you for doing the job they require to maintain order. The actual execution is the simplest part of your work. You've performed hundreds, beheadings, hangings, breaking on the wheel, burning at the stake. Each method requires different skills, and a bungled execution can end your career or your life. 2 towns over, An executioner who took 5 strokes to behead a nobleman was torn apart by the crowd. You've perfected your technique through countless hours of practice on animal carcasses and the occasional fresh corpse provided by the authorities for educational purposes. But execution is only part of your duties. You're also the town torturer, extracting confessions with methods that would horrify those who later cheer at the public deaths. The strappado, where prisoners are hoisted by their bound wrists behind their backs. The boot, which slowly crushes feet and ankles. The water torture, forcing gallons down throats until stomachs nearly burst. You've become an expert at keeping subjects conscious and alive through hours of agony. Dead men tell no tales. After all, the screams no longer affect you, which perhaps should worry you more than it does. Historians still argue whether medieval executioners felt remorse for their work. You can't speak for others, but your dreams are populated by headless corpses and the faces of those you've tortured. The priest says God forgives all sins committed in service of justice, but he won't take communion from your hands. You're barred from most religious services, sitting in a segregated section when allowed in church at all. Your very touch is considered polluting. Last month, a merchant whose cloak you accidentally brushed against burned the garment rather than wear it again. The condemned man kneels before the block, and you step forward to perform your duty. The crowd falls silent. This is the moment they've come to see. You raise the sword, feeling its familiar weight, and bring it down in a perfect arc. The head rolls cleanly away, and the crowd erupts in mixed cheers and gasps. Another clean kill, another day's work completed. You'll receive 4 silver coins for this execution, plus the dead man's clothes, one of the traditional perquisites of your office. As you leave the scaffold, people scramble to collect the blood dripping from the platform. They believe it has healing properties, especially blood from the executed. You could tell them that dead blood is just dead blood, but who would listen to the executioner? You're simultaneously feared as death's agent and sought for supernatural services. People secretly visit seeking love potions, curse remedies, and especially the rendered fat from hanged criminals believed to cure joint pain. Your house contains jars of unspeakable ingredients harvested from your work, a side business that supplements your execution fees. Tonight, you'll return to your house on the town's outskirts, where your family waits in similar isolation. Your son, now 14, has begun his own training. You watch him practice with the sword and wonder if there's any escape from this inherited curse. Some executioners' sons have fled to distant cities, changing their names and trades, but the past has a way of catching up. The executioner's mark, invisible but indelible, seems to follow the bloodline wherever it goes. The murky water of the marsh reaches your waist as you wade deeper into the reeds, ignoring the bog's sulphurous stench and the unseen things brushing against your legs in the dark water. As a leech collector, you're pursuing one of medieval medicine's most essential supplies, and the best leeches, those fat, hungry medicinal ones that physicians pay top coin for, don't come to you. You have to venture into their territory, offering your own blood as bait in a transaction that would make those executioners from the town square faint, dead away. You've already rolled up your shirt and smeared your arms with fresh pig blood from the butcher, a trick your grandmother taught you before the marsh fever took her. The blood attracts them faster than bare skin alone, though you'll still need to stand perfectly still for the next hour, while nature's most persistent vampires find you. The first one latches onto your forearm with that familiar pinch, not painful exactly, but deeply unsettling in a way that never gets easier. Within minutes, You'll have dozens attached to your arms, legs, and torso, growing fat with your blood. The morning mist rises off the stagnant water, and you try not to think about what else lurks in these marshes. Last month, another collector disappeared entirely. They found only his collecting jar floating among the reeds, still half full of leeches. Some say he stepped into a bog hole and drowned. Others whisper about marsh spirits that drag people under. You prefer the practical explanation. Though drowning while covered in blood-sucking parasites isn't exactly comforting either. The real danger isn't supernatural. It's the marsh fever that claims at least a third of collectors before their 40th year. You feel more leeches attaching themselves, each one injecting its anticoagulant saliva to keep your blood flowing freely. Your arms are now covered in dark, writhing shapes, and you begin the delicate process of removal. Pull too hard and you'll damage the leech, making it worthless to physicians. Too gentle and it won't release, continuing to feed until it drops off naturally, which could take hours. You've developed a technique using salt water and a thin blade to encourage them to detach. But even with years of practice, you'll lose some of your cargo. The irony of your profession isn't lost on you. These creatures you're collecting will be used to treat everything from headaches to hysteria. Their medicinal value so prized that a good leech can cost as much as a loaf of bread. Yet you, who provide this essential medical supply, are treated barely better than the plague buriers. Leech collectors are forbidden from most public bathhouses. Proprietors claim your blood is tainted from constant exposure to the creatures. You've been turned away from inns, refused service at market stalls, and last Easter, the priest made you wait until every other parishioner had received communion before reluctantly serving you. The physical toll of your work shows in the scars covering your body, pale, circular marks where thousands of leeches have fed over the years. Your blood doesn't clot properly anymore. Even small cuts bleed for hours. The physician who buys your leeches explained that constant exposure to leech saliva has altered your humours, though he seemed more fascinated than concerned. He offered to study your condition for medical advancement, but you declined. Being a leech collector is degrading enough without becoming a medical curiosity. Historians still argue whether medieval leech collectors used their own blood exclusively or also employed animals as bait. Your grandfather claimed he once used a dying horse, leading it into the marsh and collecting the leeches that attached to its legs. You've tried using pig bladders filled with blood, but leeches seem to prefer living prey. They're surprisingly discerning for creatures without eyes. They can sense warmth, movement, and carbon dioxide from several feet away. You've learned to read the water's surface, watching for the ripples that indicate a leech swimming toward you. Your jar is nearly full now, perhaps 40 good specimens that will fetch decent money at the medical market. You begin wading back toward shore, careful not to disturb your precious cargo. Each leech must be kept in fresh water and transferred to the physicians within 2 days, or they'll weaken and become useless for bloodletting. The best medical leeches, Hirudo medicinalis, can survive for months between feedings, making them perfect for physicians who might not need them immediately. The social stigma extends to your entire family. Your wife supplements your income by preparing the leeches for sale, sorting them by size and apparent health. Your children help by gathering marsh plants that keep the leeches calm during transport. It's a family business born of necessity. No other trade will accept someone married to a leech collector. Your daughter shows promise as a herbalist, but the Apothecary Guild has already made it clear she's unwelcome. The sins of the father, or in this case, the bloodstains. As you reach solid ground, You notice fresh bite marks on your ankles, stragglers you missed during collection. You'll let them feed until they drop off naturally. Forcible removal leaves wounds that fester in this marsh air. Tonight, you'll count your earnings and tend to your wounds with the same bitter salve your grandmother made. Tomorrow, you'll return to the marsh, rolling up your sleeves and wading back into the domain of the leeches. It's a living, barely, paid for in blood and measured in scars. At least you're not handling corpses like those poor plague buriers, you tell yourself. Though sometimes the distinction feels as thin as the line between healing and harming. The pile of bones reaches your shoulders as you sort through today's haul from the knacker's yard, separating the valuable pieces from the worthless gristle and cartilage. As a bone grubber, you spend your days scavenging through refuse heaps, gutters, and slaughterhouse dumps, collecting the skeletal remains that others consider worthless garbage. Your hands, permanently stained brown from handling decomposing animal matter, work quickly to identify the good bones, those dense, heavy pieces that the bone mills will actually pay for, from the lighter, porous ones that aren't worth the space in your sack. You started before dawn, prowling the streets with your hook and sack, competing with dogs, rats, and other bone grubbers for the choicest pieces. The butcher's row is always your first stop, where you sweet-talk apprentices into saving the larger bones before they're tossed into the general refuse. A beef thigh bone in good condition can fetch a halfpenny, enough for a small loaf of bread. The skull of a horse, if intact, might bring 2p. It's not much. But when you're living on the absolute bottom rung of medieval society, every penny counts. The smell doesn't bother you anymore. That died somewhere around your 3rd month in the trade. What does bother you is the competition. Other bone grubbers guard their territories fiercely, and fights break out over particularly rich refuse heaps. Last week, you saw 2 grubbers nearly kill each other over a pile of ox bones behind the tannery. The winner limped away with perhaps 3p worth of merchandise and a knife wound that will probably fester. You've learned to work the margins, finding the spots other grubbers miss or consider too dangerous, like the ditch behind the hospital where they dump the amputated limbs. Yes, you heard that correctly. While you primarily deal in animal bones, the reality of medieval bone grubbing occasionally blurs the line between human and beast. The bone mills claim they only process animal remains, but they don't look too closely at what goes into their grinding stones. Ground bone is ground bone, whether it's destined for fertilizer, glue making, or the mysterious compounds apothecaries use. You've found human remains more than once in your scavenging, usually from paupers' graves disturbed by flooding or construction. You tell yourself you leave them be, but when your children haven't eaten in 2 days, moral boundaries become flexible. The social hierarchy among society's dregs is complex, and bone grubbers sit somewhere near the bottom, just above beggars, but below even the night soil men. At least the gong farmers have a recognized trade with guild protection. You're just a scavenger, barely more respectable than the ravens that compete with you for carrion. Shop owners chase you away with brooms, children throw stones, and the city watch regularly rousts you from whatever doorway you're sleeping in. The only people who treat you with anything approaching respect are the bone mill operators, and that's only because they need your goods. Your collecting sack weighs heavy on your shoulder as you make your way to the bone mill at the edge of town. The massive grinding stones, powered by water wheel, reduce bones to powder with a sound like thunder. The dust that rises from the mill coats everything in a fine white layer, giving the workers a ghostly appearance. They say breathing bone dust for too long rots your lungs from the inside, but the mill workers seem healthy enough. Or maybe the sick ones just disappear and are quickly replaced. Labor is cheap when you're desperate. Historians still argue whether bone grubbing was a profession or just a survival strategy for the destitute. From where you're standing, knee-deep in a refuse heap, and fighting a particularly aggressive rat for a lamb's femur, the distinction seems academic. You have regular buyers, established routes, and even a few professional tricks, like knowing that bones from young animals are worth less than mature ones, or that marrow-filled bones fetch premium prices from certain buyers who ask no questions about their ultimate use. The bone merchant weighs your day's collection on his scales, and you watch carefully for the thumb on the balance that would cheat you of precious pennies. 23 pounds of mixed bones, mostly cattle and sheep, with a few horse bones mixed in. After some haggling, you walk away with 8 pence. Not bad for a day's work, though your back aches from constantly bending and your latest cuts from sharp bone fragments are already showing signs of infection. The physician who might treat them costs more than you make in a month, so you'll do what bone grubbers always do: wrap the wounds in scraps of cloth and hope for the best. Tomorrow you'll be back on the streets before dawn, hook and sack in hand, racing to beat other grubbers to the best spots. There's talk of a horse that died near the mill. If you can get there first, you might salvage enough to feed your family for a week. It's not much of a life, grubbing through garbage for bones, but it's survival. And in the harsh reality of medieval poverty, survival is its own form of success. At least you're not wading through marshes letting leeches drain your blood, you think. Though honestly, some days that seems like it might be easier. The sewer tunnel narrows ahead, forcing you to crawl on your hands and knees through a river of human waste mixed with the putrid runoff from butcher shops and tanneries. As a rat catcher, you're pursuing your quarry into the darkest, most disease-ridden corners of the medieval city, where the rats grow fat on garbage and multiply faster than the plague they carry. Your trained ferret squirms in the leather pouch at your side, eager to be released into the hunt, while your small terrier splashes behind you, already bloodied from this morning's kills. You've been tracking this particular colony for 3 days, following the signs that only an experienced rat catcher would notice: the grease marks along walls where their fur rubs, the scattered droppings that indicate feeding areas, the gnawed holes that serve as highways between buildings. This tunnel system beneath the merchant quarter houses thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. The city council is paying triple rates after several granaries reported massive losses, and you intend to earn every penny, even if it means spending the next 12 hours breathing sewer gas and dodging the worst of what flows through these ancient Roman passages. The smell down here transcends normal human experience. It's not just excrement and decay. It's the concentrated essence of urban filth, seasoned with dead animals, rotting food, and the peculiar musk of countless rats. Your nose stopped registering it properly years ago, though you notice people backing away when you emerge from the sewers. Your wife makes you strip and wash in the courtyard before entering the house, burning herbs and hanging garlic to mask the stench that seems to seep from your very pores. She's never quite gotten used to finding half-dead rats in your pockets when she does the washing. You release your ferret into a promising hole, listening to the squeaks and scrambling that indicate it's found prey. Ferrets are vicious little killers, perfectly designed to pursue rats through their own tunnels. Yours is particularly good. You've trained her since she was a kit, and she's learned to drive rats toward your nets, rather than killing them in places you can't reach. The terrier waits eagerly for any rat that escapes the ferret's attention, shaking them to death with practiced efficiency. Between your animals and your various traps, you can clear 100 rats from a building in a single day. The real skill in rat catching isn't just killing them. Any fool with a club can smash a rat. It's understanding their behavior, predicting their movements, and most importantly, surviving the diseases they carry. You've seen other rat catchers die from mysterious fevers, their lymph nodes swollen like the plague victims you remember from your childhood. Some develop the rat catcher's cough, hacking up blood-tinged phlegm until they can barely breathe. You've been lucky so far, suffering only from the usual cuts and bites that come with handling angry rodents. You treat them with a poultice of honey and cobwebs, an old remedy your master taught you. The city's attitude toward rat catchers perfectly encapsulates medieval hypocrisy. They desperately need your services. Rats destroy more grain than human thieves, spread disease, and terrorize households. Yet you're treated as barely human, forbidden from most public spaces, and required to display your kills as proof of work before receiving payment. Last week, a merchant accused you of breeding rats to ensure steady employment. The irony of suggesting someone would voluntarily increase the rat population while standing ankle-deep in sewage hunting them was apparently lost on him. Historians still argue whether medieval rat catchers understood the connection between rats and disease. You may not know the scientific details, but you've noticed patterns. Plague always seems worst in areas with the most rats. Households that employ your services regularly suffer fewer mysterious illnesses. You've developed your own theories about rat poison in their bite, though the physicians scoff at such ideas from an unlettered sewer crawler. They prefer their theories about planetary alignments and imbalanced humours, even as you remove the actual vectors of disease from beneath their feet. Your ferret emerges from the tunnel, dragging a rat nearly as large as herself. It's a big male, scarred from countless territorial battles, the kind that can bite through leather gloves and leave wounds that fester for weeks. You dispatch it quickly and add it to your growing collection. By day's end, you'll have several dozen to display in the market square, strung up on poles as proof of your effectiveness. The sight disgusts the gentlefolk, but is the only way to ensure payment from city officials who'd otherwise claim you spent the day tavern crawling. The tunnel ahead splits into 3 passages, and you pause to read the signs. Fresh droppings lead left, toward the cathedral district, where the rats feast on communion wafers and nest in the warmth of the crypts. The center tunnel heads toward the fish market, promising well-fed rats grown lazy on spoiled merchandise. The right passage, though that leads to the section you've been avoiding all morning. 2 rat catchers disappeared down there last month, and while the authorities blame cave-ins or drowning, you've heard whispers of something else. Rats fleeing en masse from that direction, as if running from a predator worse than any ferret. You choose the center tunnel. You're brave, not stupid. As you crawl deeper into the medieval city's putrid underbelly, you reflect on the strange nobility of your profession. You're fighting a war against creatures that would otherwise overrun human civilization. Armed with nothing but cunning, trained animals, and an iron stomach. Let the bone grubbers scavenge their remains and the leech collectors drain their blood. You're down here in the 5th circle of urban hell, keeping the rats from inheriting the earth. The screaming starts before you even heat the cauterizing iron, a piercing wail that cuts through the tavern's smoky air like your bones saw through flesh. As a barber surgeon, you're about to perform your 3rd amputation of the week, this time on a carpenter whose hand was crushed by a falling beam and has turned the ominous black-green of gangrene. Your surgical tools, if you can call them that, lie spread on a blood-stained cloth, a saw that's seen better days, a few rusty knives, and the red-hot iron that will hopefully stop him from bleeding to death once you've removed the rotting appendage. You take a long pull from your flask of strong wine, partly to steady your hands, mostly to dull your own senses for what's coming. There's no anesthetic beyond the leather strip you've given the carpenter to bite down on, and the two strong men holding him to the table. Medieval surgery is speed and brute strength, not precision. The faster you cut, the better chance he has of surviving the shock. You've gotten good at this. Your record is removing a leg below the knee in under 3 minutes. Though the patient died anyway when the wound went septic. Your profession straddles the uncomfortable line between medicine and butchery. You're not a physician. Those learned men with their university degrees wouldn't dirty their hands with actual cutting. They diagnose from urine samples and astrological charts, prescribing herbs and bloodletting while leaving the messy work to barber surgeons like you. You learned your trade through apprenticeship, starting as a boy who held down screaming patients and working your way up to wielding the saw yourself. The same hands that shave beards in the morning might be elbow deep in someone's abdomen by afternoon. The carpenter's screams reach a new pitch as you begin sawing through the bone just above his wrist. Blood spurts with each stroke, coating your leather apron and adding fresh stains to the tavern floor. The smell of gangrene mixed with fierce sweat and spilled wine creates a uniquely horrific atmosphere. Your assistant, a boy who reminds you of yourself 15 years ago, turns green and runs for the door. You can't blame him. The sound of sawing through living bone is something that never leaves you, appearing in quiet moments like an echo from hell. Your workspace is wherever someone needs cutting. Tavern back rooms, private homes, sometimes right in the street if the injury is severe enough. You carry your tools in a leather roll, each implement serving multiple purposes. The same knife that lances boils also removes teeth and cuts hair. The razor that gives clean shaves opens veins for bloodletting. It's all about versatility when you're serving as doctor, dentist, and hairdresser to people too poor for specialists. Cross-contamination isn't a concept that exists yet. You wipe the blood off your tools and move on to the next customer. The social status of barber surgeons is complicated. You're essential enough that even nobles might summon you for certain procedures. Yet you're grouped with other manual laborers rather than medical professionals. The red and white striped pole outside your shop, representing blood and bandages, marks you as someone who works with their hands in an era that values intellectual pursuits over practical skills. Physicians look down on you even as they send patients your way for procedures they consider beneath them. You're caught in the middle, too educated for common laborers but too blood-stained for polite society. Historians still argue whether barber surgeons understood infection or simply got lucky with some of their practices. You don't know why washing wounds with wine helps prevent the rot, or why cauterizing with hot iron sometimes saves lives. You just know what you've observed over hundreds of procedures. Your master taught you to look for the laudable pus that signals healing versus the foul-smelling discharge that means death. You've developed your own theories about bad air, entering wounds and corrupt humors in the blood, mixing folk wisdom with practical experience. The amputation is complete, and you grab the glowing iron from the brazier. The smell of burning flesh fills the room as you press it against the stump, sealing blood vessels and hopefully preventing him from bleeding out. The carpenter has mercifully passed out from the pain. They usually do once the bone cutting starts. You'll leave instructions for his care with his wife. Keep the wound clean, change the bandages daily, and pray. That last part is crucial. In your experience, the patients who survive major surgery are often those with the strongest will to live, whether from faith, stubbornness, or sheer spite. Your afternoon appointments are typical for a barber surgeon, 2 tooth extractions, a bleeding for a merchant convinced he has too much choleric humour, a shave and haircut for the baker, and a consultation about a suspicious growth on a tanner's neck. You'll handle them all with the same tools, the same hands that just sawed through living bone. It's a grotesque kind of efficiency that would horrify those physicians with their clean robes and theoretical knowledge. But down here in the blood and muck of practical medicine, you're the one actually helping people, or at least trying to. By evening, you're exhausted, your apron so caked with dried blood it could stand on its own. 3 out of 4 patients you operated on this week are still alive, which is better than average. The carpenter's wife paid you with a chicken and a promise of free repairs to your shop, barter being more common than coin for your services. You wash your tools in vinegar, hang them to dry, and prepare for tomorrow's mix of shaving and surgery. It's not a glamorous life, straddling the line between barber and butcher, but someone has to do the cutting. At least you're not crawling through sewers chasing rats like those poor catchers. Though honestly, some days their job seems cleaner. The Thames mud squelches between your toes as you wade deeper into the stinking mire, your eyes scanning the riverbed for the telltale glint of metal among the refuse. As a tosher, you make your living scavenging in London's sewers and river mudflats, hunting for lost treasures in the city's liquid waste. Your long pole probes ahead, testing for deep holes and unstable ground that could swallow you whole. 3 toshers drowned last month when high tide caught them in the tunnels, and their bodies still haven't been found. You've been working since the tide went out at dawn, racing against time to cover as much ground as possible before the Thames reclaims its territory. The best pickings are where the major sewer outlets meet the river, where centuries of lost objects accumulate in toxic deltas of human waste and industrial runoff. Your trained eye spots value where others see only filth. A bent copper nail here, a button there, and if you're incredibly lucky, the occasional coin dropped through a privy or washed from someone's pocket. The tools of your trade are simple but essential. Your 7-foot pole serves triple duty as a walking stick, probe, and weapon against the enormous rats that infest the tunnels. The canvas bag at your hip holds today's findings, already heavy with scrap metal and a few pottery shards that might fetch a penny from the right buyer. Your lantern, carefully waterproofed with wax, provides the only light in the deeper tunnels where you'll venture once the mudflats are exhausted. Most importantly, you wear thick leather gloves, not for warmth, but to protect against the cuts that kill more toshers than drowning. You learned early that every wound down here festers. The combination of sewage, rotting animal carcasses, and industrial waste creates a bacterial soup that turns the smallest scratch into a death sentence. Your arms bear the scars of countless close calls, purple lines where infections nearly claimed you before you learned the tosher's remedy, immediate cauterization with your own lantern flame. The pain is excruciating, but it's better than watching your arm rot off over the course of a week. You've seen it happen to newcomers who thought they were too tough for such precautions. The hierarchy among society's scavengers places toshers somewhere between bone grubbers and pure mudlarks. You at least have the sewers as your domain, while mudlarks are restricted to the riverbanks. You've developed an uneasy territorial system with other toshers, each claiming certain tunnel sections based on seniority and willingness to fight. Your patch includes the outlets from Cheapside, where merchants and wealthy households produce the most valuable waste. Last week, you found a silver thimble that fetched 2 shillings, more than most labourers make in a week. The real danger isn't just disease or drowning. It's the flushers employed by the city to periodically clean the sewers. They release massive volumes of water without warning, turning tunnels into death traps in seconds. You've learned to read the signs: unusual water flow patterns, the sudden silence of rats, the way your lantern flame flickers in changing air currents. When these omens appear, you run. Pride has no place in the sewers. The veterans who taught you the trade had a saying: better a live coward than a rich corpse. Historians still argue whether Toshas were primarily sewer workers or river scavengers. But the truth is, you work wherever the picking is good. Low tide exposes treasures in the mud, while the sewers offer year-round hunting regardless of weather. You've developed a mental map of the entire underground system, knowing which tunnels flood at high tide, where pockets of deadly gas accumulate, and most importantly, where the city's wealthy districts discharge their waste. It's said that more gold flows through London's sewers than through its banks, and after years of toshing, you believe it. Your greatest find came 2 winters ago, a leather purse containing 6 gold sovereigns, likely dropped by some drunk merchant relieving himself. That single discovery earned more than you'd normally make in 2 years of toshing. Of course, you couldn't spend it openly. A tosher suddenly flush with gold draws the wrong kind of attention. You parceled it out slowly, claiming you'd found individual coins over months. Even then, the fence who changed your gold took half its value, knowing you had no legal recourse. The tide is turning, and you reluctantly head back toward shore. Your bag holds perhaps 3 shillings worth of scrap, not a fortune, but enough to keep your family fed for another few days. Tomorrow you'll venture into the deep tunnels beneath Whitechapel, where they say a tosher found a cache of Roman coins last year. More likely, you'll find only the usual detritus of urban life: lost buttons, bent nails, and the occasional corpse of someone who ventured too deep and never returned. As you emerge from the Thames mud, caked in filth that will never completely wash off, you catch your reflection in a puddle. You look like some primordial creature, barely human beneath the layers of muck. The respectable folk hurrying past avert their eyes, holding perfumed handkerchiefs to their noses. They don't want to acknowledge that people like you exist, scavenging wealth from their waste. But tonight, when they drop something valuable down their privies, it becomes your treasure. You're the bottom feeder of the urban ecosystem, turning shit literally into gold. When you're lucky. At least you're not performing surgery with the same hands that cut hair, like those barber surgeons. Though given what you've been wading through all day, maybe their job is actually cleaner. The dying man's family watches in horror as you lift the wooden bowl of milk to your lips, knowing that with each sip, you're supposedly drawing their father's sins into your own soul. As a sin-eater, you perform one of a medieval society's most reviled yet secretly essential services, ritually consuming food and drink over a corpse to absolve the deceased of their earthly transgressions. The bread placed on the dead man's chest has been there for 3 hours, absorbing whatever spiritual contamination lingers in his cooling flesh. And now you must eat every crumb while his widow weeps in the corner. You weren't born to this profession. Few are. You fell into it after your own family died of plague, leaving you destitute and desperate enough to accept the first paying work offered. That first ritual nearly broke you. The family made you eat salt beef that had been sitting on the corpse for a full day, and you vomited repeatedly afterward, though whether from the spoiled meat or the psychological weight of consuming another's sins remains unclear. Now, 5 years later, you can keep down almost anything, though you still feel each sin settling into your gut like a stone. The theological implications of your work occupy your thoughts during the long walks between villages. The Church officially condemns sin eating as pagan superstition, yet priests quietly refer families to you when dealing with particularly troublesome deaths, suicides, murder victims, those who died without last rites. You exist in a spiritual grey area, neither sanctioned nor explicitly forbidden, tolerated because you provide comfort to the living even as you damn yourself. Each ritual adds more weight to your soul, or so everyone believes. You've eaten the sins of thieves, adulterers, murderers, and once, terrifyingly, a priest who died in a brothel. Your fee varies with the severity of the deceased's sins and the family's desperation. A pious grandmother might cost only a penny and a meal, while a known criminal could bring a full shilling, though you'll pay for it in the community's increased revulsion. You've developed a sliding scale based on your reading of the family's grief and guilt. The more they fear for their loved one's soul, the more they'll pay to transfer that burden to you. It's ghoulish economics, but you have to eat, both literally and figuratively. The physical props of your trade are simple but symbolically loaded. The bread absorbs sins through direct contact with the corpse. The bowl of milk represents innocence being corrupted. Sometimes families add salt for purification or honey to sweeten the bitter passage of sins. You've eaten funeral cakes decorated with crosses, dried fruits meant to represent different transgressions, and once, memorably, an entire roasted chicken because the deceased was a notorious glutton and his wife insisted his sin required substantial consumption to fully transfer. The loneliness of your profession is perhaps worse than the spiritual burden. No one will share a meal with a sin-eater. You're considered contaminated by the accumulated evil you've consumed. You eat alone, sleep alone, and will certainly die alone. Villages tolerate your presence only when needed, then drive you out with stones and curses once the ritual is complete. You've learned to camp outside settlements, building small shelters in forests and abandoned buildings. Other outcasts sometimes share your fires, lepers, madmen, discharged soldiers, but even they keep their distance once they learn your profession. Historians still argue whether sin-eating was widespread or limited to certain regions, particularly the Welsh borders. Your experience suggests it's more common than official records indicate, existing in the shadows of proper Christian burial. You've been called to perform rituals across England, always in secret, always at night. The families swear you to silence, terrified that their neighbours will discover they've employed pagan practices. Yet those same neighbours will quietly approach you months later when their own needs arise. The worst part isn't the assumed damnation. It's the weight of secrets you carry, deathbed confessions whispered by families, crimes revealed only because the perpetrator is beyond earthly justice, sins so dark that even you hesitate before accepting the commission. You know which respected merchant killed his partner, which loving wife poisoned her husband, which priest touched children. This knowledge sits in your stomach with the symbolic sins, a burden of truth as heavy as any spiritual contamination. Tonight's ritual is nearly complete. You've consumed the bread, drunk the milk, and spoken the traditional words that vary by region, but always amount to the same promise. I give easement and rest now to thee, dear man. Come not down the lanes or in our meadows, and for thy peace I pawn my own soul. The family watches as you pocket your fee, 2 shillings, a generous amount that speaks to their desperation. Their father was a moneylender, and the interest he charged has weighed on their consciences since his death. As you leave the cottage, you feel the familiar sensation, whether real or imagined, of new sins settling into your bones, your own soul. If the folklore is true, grows heavier with each ritual. Some sin-eaters claim they can feel specific sins like flavors. Murder tastes of iron, theft of ash, lust of overripe fruit. You've never experienced such distinctions. To you, all sins taste like loneliness and sour milk, the flavor of a life spent as humanity's spiritual garbage disposal. Tomorrow you'll move on to the next village, the next corpse, the next family desperate enough to employ Christianity's dirty secret. You'll eat their sins and carry their guilt, growing ever more contaminated in the eyes of society. When you finally die, and sin-eaters always die alone, who will eat your sins? Who consumes the sins of the sin-eater? It's a question that haunts your increasingly frequent nightmares. Though you suspect the answer is simple, no one. You'll die as you've lived, swollen with the spiritual filth of others. A cautionary tale about the price of taking on burdens that were never meant to be borne. At least those toshas only wade through physical sewage. Your work involves drowning in the metaphysical kind. The prince's tutor raises the birch rod high, and you brace yourself for the beating that should be falling on royal shoulders, but will instead tear into your own flesh. As the whipping boy to Prince Edward, you receive every punishment earned by a child who, by divine right, cannot be touched by common hands. The rod whistles down, striking your back with practiced precision, and you bite down on the leather strap to keep from crying out. Showing weakness would only extend the punishment. And worse, disappoint the prince who considers you his closest friend. You were chosen for this position at age 6, selected from minor nobility for your quick wit, pleasant demeanor, and most importantly, your ability to form a genuine bond with the prince. The theory behind your role is ingeniously cruel. Since the prince cannot be physically disciplined, he must watch his beloved companions suffer for his mistakes. The emotional pain of seeing you beaten is supposed to inspire better behavior. In practice, it's created a relationship so complex that court psychologists would study it for centuries if they knew the full truth. Your days begin before dawn, preparing for lessons alongside the prince. You must learn everything he learns: Latin, Greek, mathematics, statecraft, martial arts. Because how else could you fairly receive punishment for failures in subjects you don't understand? This parallel education has made you one of the most well-educated children in England, though you'll never be allowed to use that knowledge for your own advancement. You exist solely as an extension of the prince's conscience, a living, breathing reminder of consequences. The physical beatings are actually the easiest part of your role to endure. You've developed a high pain tolerance and learned to disassociate during punishments, letting your mind float somewhere above your body while the rod or strap does its work. What's harder is the emotional manipulation inherent in your position. You must genuinely care for the prince. Fake friendship would be detected immediately, yet also accept that your suffering is considered a reasonable price for his education. You're simultaneously his best friend and his sacrificial lamb. Your quarters adjoin the prince's chambers, luxurious by common standards, but a constant reminder of your liminal status. You're not quite nobility, not quite servant, existing in a social twilight zone created specifically for this role. Court ladies pity you. Court gentlemen regard you with a mixture of respect and contempt. And servants don't know whether to bow or ignore you. Your own family treats you like a stranger when you visit, unable to reconcile the educated, scarred boy you've become with the child they gave to the crown. The dynamics between you and Prince Edward have evolved far beyond what the position's creators intended. He's developed an almost obsessive protectiveness toward you, flying into rages when tutors are too harsh. Yet he continues to misbehave knowing you'll suffer. It's as if he needs to test the bond repeatedly, confirming that you'll endure anything for him. You've become codependent in the strangest way. He acts out partly to see proof of your devotion, and you endure it partly to maintain your unique position of influence. Historians still argue whether whipping boys were widespread or limited to a few royal courts. Your experience suggests it's rarer than folklore implies, but more psychologically complex than records indicate. The official documents describe your role in sterile terms: proxy for corporal punishment, companion to His Highness. But they don't capture the midnight conversations where the prince weeps over your wounds, or the way he sometimes deliberately fails lessons just to share your suffering, insisting it's only fair. The scars covering your back tell the story of the prince's education better than any chronicle. Here, a series of welts from when he refused to conjugate Latin verbs. There, a particularly deep scar from the time he struck his mathematics tutor. Your body is a living record of royal misbehavior, each mark a lesson learned by proxy. The court physician treats your wounds with expensive salves, muttering about the barbarism of the practice, but even he won't speak against tradition. Your strangest power is the influence you wield through suffering. The prince values your opinion above his official counselors precisely because you've bled for him. When you suggest mercy for a servant, or recommend a particular course of action, he listens with attention he gives no one else. You've become his conscience externalized, the voice that reminds him actions have consequences, even if those consequences fall on someone else. It's a perverse form of moral education, but it seems to be working. The future weighs heavily on your mind. What happens to a whipping boy when the prince comes of age? Some are pensioned off quietly, given estates far from court where they can nurse their scars in peace. Others remain as trusted advisors, their shared suffering creating an unbreakable bond. A few, whisper the servants, meet mysterious ends. Knowing too much about royal weakness is dangerous once that weakness sits on the throne. Today's beating ends with the usual ritual. The prince dismisses everyone else and tends your wounds himself, applying salves with hands that shake slightly. He promises, as always, to do better, to spare you future pain. You nod and tell him you forgive him, as always, knowing tomorrow will bring new failures and fresh wounds. It's a dance you've performed hundreds of times, this exchange of pain for absolution, suffering for intimacy. As you lie on your stomach tonight, waiting for the welts to stop throbbing, you think about those sin-eaters consuming spiritual pain. At least their suffering has a clear theological purpose. Your pain exists in a strange middle ground, not quite sacrifice, not quite punishment, but something uniquely medieval in its twisted logic. You absorb the prince's consequences, becoming a living buffer between royal flesh and common justice. Tomorrow you'll wake, dress his wounds of conscience with your presence, and prepare for whatever fresh pain his education requires. It's not much of a life, but it's the only one you've known, measured in lessons learned and scars earned in someone else's name. The bedroom reeks of stale urine and unwashed bodies as you scrape the crystallized deposits from beneath the floorboards, trying not to breathe through your nose while the house's owner hovers nervously in the doorway. As a saltpeter collector, you have legal authority to enter any home and harvest the potassium nitrate that forms wherever human and animal waste has seeped into earth or wood over many years. The yellowish-white crystals you're collecting will eventually become gunpowder. But first, you must endure the intimate violation of searching through people's most private spaces for their accumulated filth. Your warrant from the Crown gives you powers that even tax collectors envy. You can demand entry to any building, dig up any floor, and scrape any wall where saltpeter might form. The best deposits are found in bedrooms where chamber pots have been emptied carelessly for decades, in stables where horse urine has soaked into the earth, and especially in the packed earth floors of poor households where generations have relieved themselves in corners. You've become an expert at reading the signs, dark stains on walls, a particular crystalline shimmer on soil, the acrid smell that indicates a rich deposit. The homeowner's wife watches in horror as you pry up their bedroom floorboards, exposing years of accumulated waste. You ignore her tears and continue scraping, filling your leather bags with the precious crystals. Each pound of refined saltpeter brings 2 shillings from the government powder mills, making this one of the more lucrative forms of manual labour. Of course, there's the minor detail that everyone despises you more than they fear the taxman. At least he only takes their money. You literally scrape their piss-soaked walls. Your tools are simple but effective. Iron scrapers for removing crystals from wood and stone, a small pick for breaking up compressed deposits, and most importantly, your testing kit. Not every white crystal is saltpeter. You've learned to distinguish it from common salt or lime deposits by taste and flame tests. True saltpeter has a cooling, bitter flavour and burns with a distinctive purple flame. You've probably consumed more trace amounts of crystallized urine than any human should, all in the name of quality control. The legal framework supporting your work is fascinating in its overreach. The saltpeter men hold royal monopoly on collection, and interfering with your work is considered treason. The Crown needs gunpowder, and gunpowder needs saltpeter. You've seen families find ruinous amounts for trying to clean their own walls before your arrival, destroying potential deposits. Some desperate homeowners try to bribe you to skip their houses, but the penalties for accepting such bribes include public flogging. The Crown takes its explosives seriously. The worst part of your job isn't the filth, it's the violation of privacy. You know which merchants wet their beds, which noble ladies have bladder control issues, which families are too poor to properly maintain their privies. You've scraped crystals from beneath the beds of newlyweds and deathbeds alike, each deposit telling its own story of human biology. The intimacy is unwanted on both sides, yet necessary for the realm's defence. Every cannon fired, every musket discharged, requires the saltpeter you harvest from England's collective waste. Historians still argue whether saltpeter collection was as invasive as records suggest. Your daily experience confirms the worst accounts. You've been attacked by embarrassed homeowners, bitten by dogs trained to guard family privacy, and once narrowly avoided being shot by a gentleman who claimed he'd rather hang for murder than let you expose his wife's incontinence. The job requires not just strong stomach, but physical courage. Desperate people do desperate things when faced with such humiliation. Your rounds take you through every level of society, from hovels to manor houses. The rich try to maintain dignity by having servants deal with you, pretending the shameful deposits don't exist. The poor have no such luxury. You scrape their walls while they watch, unable to afford separate quarters where they might hide. The middle classes are worst, caught between pride and poverty, often trying to convince you their houses are too clean to bother searching. You've learned to ignore all protests and follow your nose. The technical process of refinement occupies your evenings. Raw saltpeter must be dissolved in water, filtered through ash and straw, then crystallized through careful evaporation. Your workshop, a converted barn outside town, contains huge vats where the solutions slowly concentrate. The smell is indescribable, a concentrated essence of every privy and stable you've scraped. Your wife left you 3 years ago, claiming she could no longer stand the stench that no amount of washing could remove. You didn't blame her. Today's haul is particularly rich, nearly 12 pounds of raw crystals from a boarding house where the landlady had clearly never heard of proper chamber pot disposal. You'll refine it down to perhaps 8 pounds of pure saltpeter, enough to make several barrels of gunpowder. As you load your bags onto your cart, ignoring the hostile stares of neighbours, you reflect on the strange alchemy of your profession. You transform human waste into the power of war, turning piss into the thunder of cannons. The children throw stones as you leave, their parents making no effort to stop them. You're used to it. The saltpeter man is a favourite boogeyman, threatened upon children who won't use the privy properly. Behave, or the saltpeter man will come scrape your room. It's effective motivation, you suppose. You'll return to this street in 6 months, after enough new deposits have formed to make collection worthwhile. The cycle continues endlessly. People piss, crystals form, you scrape, cannons fire. Your guild meets monthly in a tavern that no one else will patronize, sharing information about promising locations and new extraction techniques. You're developing a theory about diet affecting saltpeter production. Households that eat more meat seem to produce richer deposits. It's the kind of observation that would disgust normal people, but fascinate your fellow collectors. You've become scientists of sewage, philosophers of filth, turning bodily waste into national defense one scraping at a time. The churchyard soil clings to your spade as you dig steadily through the night, racing against dawn and the possibility of discovery. As a resurrectionist, or body snatcher as the common folk call you, you're extracting a corpse buried just yesterday, still fresh enough to fetch premium price from the anatomy school at St. Bartholomew's. The deceased was a young woman, died in childbirth according to the sexton you bribed, and her body will teach tomorrow's surgeons about the mysteries of human anatomy. That's what you tell yourself. Anyway, as you violate the sanctity of her grave under a moonless sky, you didn't choose this profession so much as fall into it after losing your position as a gravedigger. The irony isn't lost on you. You once buried the dead for honest wages. Now you unbury them for dirty gold. The transition was easier than it should have been. You already knew every churchyard in London, understood soil conditions, could estimate decomposition rates, and most importantly, had connections with sextons and watchmen whose silence could be purchased. Your former colleagues view you with a mixture of disgust and envy. You earn in one night what they make in a month. The technical challenges of resurrection work require skills that would impress engineers. You must excavate quietly, working by touch more than sight, creating minimal disturbance to avoid detection. You've learned to dig at the head of the coffin first, breaking through just enough wood to create access, then using specially designed hooks to extract the body without fully exhuming the casket. This leaves the grave looking relatively undisturbed, buying precious time before families discover the theft. Speed is essential. A good resurrectionist can extract a corpse in under an hour. Your tools are specialized and horrifying. Iron hooks for grasping flesh, wooden wedges for prying open coffins, canvas sacks treated with vinegar to mask decomposition smells. You carry a dark lantern that can be shuttered instantly, rope for lowering yourself into deeper graves, and most importantly, a flask of gin to steady your nerves and share with watchmen. Everything must be portable and silent. Clanking tools mean discovery, and discovery means the mob. You've seen resurrectionists caught by angry crowds, beaten to death with their own spades. The medical school's desperate need for corpses drives your entire economy. Legal dissection is limited to executed criminals, providing perhaps 36 bodies annually for hundreds of medical students. The gap between supply and demand creates your market. Anatomy professors maintain careful ignorance about their specimens' origins, paying cash to anonymous deliverers who arrive at side doors in pre-dawn darkness. A fresh adult corpse brings £2 sterling, more if it has unusual pathologies. Children, God forgive you, fetch higher prices due to their rarity. The competition among resurrectionists is fierce and sometimes deadly. London's body snatchers have divided the city into territories, each gang claiming certain churchyards. Violate another crew's turf and you might end up in one of the graves you're robbing. You run with Irish Jack's crew, 4 men who've perfected the art of rapid extraction. Your specialty is befriending grieving families at funerals, learning burial details while offering fabricated condolences. It's despicable work, but knowledge is profit in this business. Historians still argue whether resurrectionists saw themselves as serving medical progress or simply as profiteers. Your perspective is complicated. You've seen the anatomy schools, watched students learn surgical techniques that save lives. Every doctor practicing today learned their craft by dissecting stolen corpses. Yet you also know the anguish of families discovering empty graves, the horror of recognizing a loved one's body on a dissection table. You tell yourself you're advancing medical knowledge, but mostly you're advancing your own purse. The legal ambiguity of your work provides thin protection. Technically, a corpse isn't property, so stealing one isn't theft. But interfering with a grave is a misdemeanor, and possession of burial shrouds, which have value, is larceny. Most magistrates impose fines rather than imprisonment, understanding the medical school's needs while maintaining public morality. Still, you operate in constant fear of both law and mob justice. Last month, a resurrectionist in Edinburgh was burned alive by relatives of a woman he'd snatched. Your deepest fear isn't capture, but the temptation that destroyed Burke and Hare. Why wait for people to die naturally when fresh corpses command such prices? You've been approached by men suggesting alternative procurement methods, and the money offered was staggering. So far, you've resisted, clinging to the moral distinction between stealing the dead and creating them. But poverty has a way of eroding principles, and sometimes passing a dark alley. You wonder how many coins a living person might be worth dead. Tonight's extraction goes smoothly. The corpse is perfect, young, intact, dead barely 24 hours. You wrap her in canvas, trying not to notice her face or the wedding ring you'll remove later for extra profit. Your partners load her onto the cart hidden nearby, covering her with sacks of potatoes. By dawn, she'll be on a dissection table, her secrets revealed to eager medical students. By next week, you'll be back, violating another grave, feeding the endless hunger of medical progress. The journey to the anatomy school follows back alleys and forgotten paths. You've memorized every route that avoids night watchmen and early rising workers. The delivery is quick. A side door opens. Money changes hands. The body disappears into the building's depths. No names, no questions, no acknowledgement of what just transpired. You split the payment with your partners and head home as the city wakes. Just another labourer heading to honest work. Your wife doesn't ask where you've been or why you smell of earth and death. She counts the coins you give her and says nothing about their origin. Your children don't know their father is a resurrection man. They think you still work as a gravedigger, which is true in the most twisted sense. You provide for them by robbing graves, each corpse buying bread and coal and shoes. It's a devil's bargain, trading the dead's dignity for the living's survival. Tomorrow night you'll do it again. There's a funeral at St. Giles, an elderly merchant with no close family to guard his grave. He'll bring good money if you get there first. 2 other crews have surely noticed the opportunity. You'll sharpen your spade, oil your lantern hinges, and prepare for another night of necessary evil. The medical schools need bodies, doctors need training, and you need money. It's the economy of death, and you're its midnight merchant. The Thames mud sucks at your bare feet as you wade deeper into the grey-brown sludge, your 8-year-old legs already aching from hours of scavenging. As a mudlark child, you're part of London's most desperate workforce, children who survive by combing the river's toxic foreshore for anything of value. Your morning started at low tide, 4 a.m., when you crept from the doorway where you slept and made your way to the water's edge. Now, as the tide creeps back in, you're racing to fill your sack with enough scraps to buy tonight's supper. Your fingers, numb from the cold water, close around a bent copper nail, your third today. Each one might fetch a farthing from the scrap dealer, and you've learned to spot their greenish gleam among the endless debris. The other mudlarks work nearby, but not together. This is solitary survival. Each child defending their finds against thieves who'd snatch your day's work without hesitation. You're one of the lucky ones, at 9 years old. You're veteran enough to know the good spots, but still light enough to venture onto mud that would swallow heavier children. The dangers of mudlarking go far beyond getting stuck. The Thames is an open sewer, receiving the waste of 1 million souls, plus the runoff from slaughterhouses, tanneries, and chemical works. Every cut on your feet, and they're always cut, is a potential death sentence. You've watched other mudlark children waste away from infections, their wounds turning black and stinking before the fever takes them. There's no money for doctors, no parents to provide care. When mudlarks die, they simply disappear. Their bodies often claimed by the same river that killed them. Your education consists entirely of survival lessons learned from older mudlarks before they died or found other work. You know that copper and brass are worth more than iron, that bones can be sold to the glue makers, that coal chunks washed from barges will keep you warm on winter nights. You've learned to read the tide tables through observation rather than literacy. You can't read words, but you can read water. Most importantly, you know never to venture too far from shore when the tide turns. The Thames is hungry, and it prefers young meat. Today's finds are meagre but sufficient. 3 nails, a broken buckle, 2 pieces of coal, and wonder of wonders, a halfpenny that must have fallen from someone's pocket. You clutch this treasure tightly, knowing it means hot food tonight instead of scavenged scraps. Your stomach cramps with constant hunger. Mudlarks are always starving, always cold, always one bad day from death. But you're free in a way that factory children aren't, answering to no master except necessity. The social hierarchy among London's child workers places mudlarks at the absolute bottom. Crossing sweepers look down on you. Match girls pity you. Even the climbing boys who clean chimneys consider themselves your superiors. You're marked by your trade, permanently stained feet, the distinctive mudlark crouch from constantly scanning the ground, clothes so caked with dried Thames mud they stand by themselves. When you venture into populated areas to sell your finds, people recoil as if you carry plague, which, given what you wade through daily, you very well might. Historians still argue whether mudlarking was primarily a children's occupation, or if adults participated equally. Your experience suggests both, though children have advantages. Your small size lets you access areas adults can't reach. Your light weight keeps you from sinking as quickly, and your nimble fingers are better at spotting and grabbing small valuables. The adult mudlarks you encounter are invariably broken, crippled, drunk, or mad, reduced to competing with children for survival scraps. You fear becoming them, but know no other life. The peculiar economy of mudlarking means you're simultaneously entrepreneur and scavenger. You must know the value of every type of metal, understand which bones are worth collecting, recognize the difference between worthless glass and sellable pottery shards. The scrap dealers who buy your finds are cruel but necessary intermediaries, paying pennies for items worth shillings. They know you have no options, no ability to hold out for better prices. A mudlark with unsold scrap doesn't eat. Your only possession besides the rags you wear is a bent iron hook, inherited from an older mudlark who drowned last winter. With it, you can probe deeper mud, pull interesting objects closer, and defend yourself when necessary. You fought off other children trying to steal your finds, adult vagrants who see you as easy prey, and once, memorably, an enormous rat that emerged from a drainpipe. The hook is tool, weapon, and the closest thing you have to a friend. As the tide rises dangerously high, you make your final retreat to dry land. Your sack holds perhaps enough for 2 days' survival if you're careful. Other mudlarks are already heading to the scrap dealers, eager to convert their finds to food before dark. You follow, feet leaving muddy prints on cobblestones, marking you as clearly as the brand on a thief. The dealer sneers at your offerings but pays the usual unfair price. You take your coins to the pie shop, buying yesterday's leftover that tastes like heaven after a day of hunger. Tonight, you'll sleep in the same doorway, wrapped in sacking, dreaming of food and warmth and parents you barely remember. Tomorrow, you'll wake before dawn and return to the river, searching for survival in London's liquid graveyard. Some mudlarks eventually find better work, growing strong enough for manual labor or lucky enough to impress a sympathetic employer. Most die young, their bodies returning to the Thames that sustained and killed them. You're a child of the river, raised by mud and neglect, educated by necessity and suffering. The Thames gives and takes according to its own logic, treasure and poison, life and death, all mixed in its brown waters. You'll continue this existence until you die, find other work, or grow too heavy for the mud. It's not much of a childhood, but it's the only one you have, measured in tides and scraps and the constant gnaw of hunger. The sun sets over London, painting the Thames the colour of old blood. You curl into your doorway, stomach temporarily quiet, and watch the river that owns you. Tomorrow it might kill you or provide enough treasure for a week's food. You'll find out at low tide, when you wade once more into the mud, hoping to survive another day as London's smallest, most desperate entrepreneurs. At least you're not handling corpses like those resurrectionists, though given how many bodies wash up on the foreshore, the distinction sometimes blurs. And so, dear listener, we've walked together through the darkest corners of medieval employment, from the excrement-soaked depths of the gong farmer's cesspit to the muddy banks where children gambled their lives for bent nails and lost pennies. Each story we've shared tonight reveals not just the extraordinary hardships of the past, but the remarkable resilience of ordinary people who found ways to survive, and even thrive in conditions that would break most of us today. As you drift towards sleep, let these tales settle gently in your mind, not as nightmares, but as reminders of how far we've come. The next time work feels overwhelming, perhaps you'll remember the fuller standing knee-deep in fermented urine, or the sin-eater swallowing the spiritual burdens of the dying. Your worst day at the office pales beside a shift in the plague pits, or an evening spent robbing graves for medical schools. These weren't just jobs, they were lifelines for the desperate, necessities for society, and above all, stories of human endurance. The people who performed these tasks were parents and children, friends and neighbors, each doing what they must to survive in a world that offered few choices and fewer mercies. Their suffering built the foundations of modern sanitation, medicine, and industry. We owe them more than our fascination. We owe them our remembrance. The candle burns low now. The shadows grow longer. And somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the late hour. Close your eyes and let gratitude wash over you for clean water, modern medicine, labor laws, and the simple dignity of work that doesn't require wading through sewage or handling the dead. Sweet dreams will come easier, knowing that whatever tomorrow brings, it won't involve crystallized urine, rotting flesh, or the weight of another's sins upon your soul. Sleep well. Dear listener, rest easy in your clean sheets, in your safe home, in this gentler time. And if you wake in the night, remember, it's just a story now, just history's echo, just a reminder of how fortunate we truly are. The past is done. The mudlarks have found their rest. And you have nothing to do but dream of better things. Good night.